Just as he signs the contract with a flourish of arrogance and lets out a taunt that draws laughs from the room, no one expects the interruption, least of all from her. With a steady gaze and a calm voice, she points out a flaw that unravels everything. The silence isn't admiration, it's fear. Something has just begun to crumble. Part 1. The air conditioning at New York City's most prestigious law firm hummed quietly on that sweltering October morning, but it did little to ease the tension in the elegant conference room. Sunbeams filtered through the massive glass windows, illuminating a polished mahogany table where documents worth millions of dollars lay. Around that table, men in impeccable suits and French silk ties awaited the start of the internal meeting that would define the future of a multi-million-dollar contract for the construction of a residential complex on the Upper East Side. Emily Hayes, 25, with fair skin that contrasted gently with her deep green eyes, moved silently between the Italian leather chairs, wiping each surface with precise, delicate motions. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, held by a worn silk ribbon that had belonged to her grandmother, Eleanor. That ribbon was the only valuable thing she owned, not for its price, but for the memories it held. Sunday afternoons in the small yard in Queens, where her grandmother grew lavender, and taught her that wisdom isn't bought with money, sweetheart. It's earned with tears and hope. 2 years had passed since Emily arrived at this firm, after going from office to office in search of work. In every interview she heard the same response. We don't have any openings for someone without experience. But here, at Thompson & Reed LLP, the head janitor, Mr. Roberts, a 62-year-old man with hands weathered by 4 decades of work, had seen her crying at the entrance after another failed interview. "Kid, do you know how to clean?" he had asked, his voice gruff but his eyes kind. Emily had nodded, never imagining that question would change her destiny. Mr. Roberts had lost his daughter in an accident years ago, and something in Emily's green eyes reminded him of her. He hired her as a cleaning assistant, unaware that the young woman had spent 5 years studying law books every night, books she found in the dumpsters of the City University of New York. While she cleaned, Emily listened. She listened to the lawyers' conversations, memorized cases, studied every document that fell into her hands before it was thrown away. Her memory was extraordinary, almost photographic, a gift she had discovered as a child while helping her grandmother memorize recipes for her herbal remedies. She could recall every clause, every article of the Civil Code, every legal precedent she had read in the stained pages of the rescued books. That morning, the tension in the room was palpable. Ethan Williams, 32, heir to the most powerful real estate empire in America, sat at the head of the table. His fair skin and blue eyes, the color of a Hampton sky, contrasted with the seriousness of his expression. He wore a black Armani suit that enhanced his athletic build, the result of years of swimming in the Olympic-sized pool of his mansion in the Hamptons. Despite his youth, he already directed the most important operations of the Williams Group, the conglomerate his father had built from the ground up, now moving billions of dollars. Ethan hadn't reached this position by chance. A magna cum laude graduate of Harvard Business School, with a master's in finance from the London School of Economics, he possessed a relentless analytical mind and an ambition many considered excessive. However, behind that facade of success, he carried the weight of a family legacy not always built on ethical foundations. His father, Mr. Emilio Williams, had passed away the previous year, taking secrets with him that were now beginning to surface. The meeting had begun with a review of the contract for the Hope Residences project, a luxury complex to be built on land acquired years ago. The firm's lawyers, led by Charles Thompson, a 58-year-old man with a graying mustache and an air of superiority, went over each clause with professional meticulousness. "Everything is in order, Mr. Williams," Mr. Thompson declared, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. "The contract is airtight. No one will be able to challenge it." Ethan picked up the Mont Blanc pen that had belonged to his father and brought it to the document. But before signing, a sarcastic smile played on his lips. The pressure of the last few months, the doubts about his father's methods, the loneliness of his powerful position, it all channeled into a comment he thought was witty. "If anyone in this room could nullify this contract," he said in a loud, clear voice, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the lawyers present, "I would marry them on the spot." The room erupted in masculine laughter, a chorus of chuckles that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. The lawyers exchanged knowing glances. Some clapped, others shook their heads, amused by the young magnate's bravado. Emily, who was cleaning an auxiliary table near the window, froze. Her hands tightened around the microfiber cloth. She had heard those kinds of comments before, from men who believed power gave them the right to belittle others, but this time was different. This time she knew something they didn't. Over the past few weeks, while organizing discarded documents, she had found papers related to this very project. Documents that revealed inconsistencies, dates that didn't match, signatures that looked suspicious. Her photographic memory had filed away every detail, every anomaly she had spotted. With her heart pounding, Emily slowly approached the table. The lawyers continued to laugh, oblivious to her presence. Ethan had already started to sign when a soft but firm voice was heard in the room. "Excuse me, Mr. Williams." The silence was instantaneous. All eyes turned to Emily, who stood by the table, her green eyes fixed on the document. Her heart was beating so hard she feared everyone could hear it, but her voice didn't waver. "I'm sorry," Ethan asked, looking up from the document with genuine surprise. "The contract you're signing," Emily continued, feeling the air thicken around her, "has a clause that completely voids it." The laughter stopped immediately. Mr. Thompson stood up abruptly, his face reddening with indignation. "How dare you? You have no right to comment on these matters. You're just cleaning staff." But Emily was unfazed. With slightly trembling hands but a steady voice, she pointed to a specific section of the document. Clause 15. 3 states that all land titles must have been issued after 1995, she explained, as everyone watched her with a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. But Clause 23.7 references a property title dated 1994. This creates a legal contradiction that, according to the Federal Civil Code, automatically invalidates the entire contract. The ensuing silence was deafening. The lawyers looked at each other, some frantically searching through the papers. Mr. Thompson took the document with trembling hands and began to review the mentioned clauses. His face gradually turned pale. Ethan didn't take his eyes off Emily. For the first time in his life, he was completely disarmed. Not by a business adversary, not by a competitor with similar resources, but by a young woman with green eyes who cleaned offices and had just proven she knew more about law than all the lawyers present. She's right, Mr. Thompson murmured, dropping the document on the table. "The contradiction exists. The contract is legally invalid." Emily nodded silently and, without another word, returned to her cleaning. She picked up her cloth and continued polishing the auxiliary table as if nothing had happened. Though her heart was still racing and her hands trembled slightly, Ethan remained motionless, the pen still in his hand, watching this extraordinary woman who had just changed everything with a few words. The other lawyers began to whisper among themselves, some checking other documents, others simply trying to process what had just happened. "How is that possible?" asked one of the junior lawyers. "How did we not see that contradiction?" "Because you're used to no one questioning you," Emily replied from her spot by the window, without looking up from her work. "And because you assume a woman who cleans offices can't know about the law." Ethan stood up slowly. His world, built on certainties and privileges, had just been shaken. He walked over to Emily, who continued to clean without looking at him. "How did you know about that contradiction?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily finally looked up. Her green eyes met his blue ones, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. "I read," she answered simply. "I read everything you throw away, and I remember everything I read." "And where did you learn law?" "In the trash," Emily replied without bitterness, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "In the books they throw out from the university. At night, when I finish work, I've read the entire Civil Code 3 times. Ethan felt something strange in his chest, a mix of admiration, shame, and an emotion he couldn't quite identify. This woman, who had been invisible to him for 2 years, had just demonstrated an intelligence and dedication that surpassed that of many professionals he knew. Mr. Thompson approached, clearly annoyed at having been exposed. "Mr. Williams, this is unacceptable. A cleaning employee cannot interrupt our meetings. This sets a dangerous precedent." Ethan looked at him coldly. "What's unacceptable, Thompson, is that a firm of your reputation was about to have me sign an invalid contract. If it weren't for Miss—" He paused, realizing he didn't know her name. "Emily," she said softly. "Emily Hayes. If it weren't for Miss Hayes," Ethan continued, "I would have lost millions of dollars and faced serious legal trouble." Emily finished her work and headed for the door, pushing her cleaning cart. Before leaving, she turned to the table where everyone was watching her. "The ribbon in my hair," she said, gently touching the worn silk ribbon, "belonged to my grandmother. She taught me that the truth always finds a way to come out, no matter who speaks it or where it comes from." And with those words, she left the room, leaving behind a silence filled with unanswered questions and a world that had just changed forever. Ethan remained motionless, watching the door through which Emily had exited. For the first time since his father's death, He felt he had found something, or someone, worth more than all his contracts and properties. But what he didn't know was that Emily carried a secret in her heart that connected them in a way he could never imagine, a secret related to that very piece of land, to her grandmother Eleanor, and to an injustice that had marked her life forever. Have you ever felt like no one valued your intelligence because of your appearance or your job? Let us know in the comments what city you're watching from, and tell us if you've ever had to prove you're worth more than others think. Don't forget to like if this story is getting you excited, and subscribe, because what's coming next will surprise you even more. Part 2. The days following the incident in the conference room passed with a tense calm at Thompson & Reed LLP. Emily continued her cleaning duties as if nothing had happened, but she could feel the stares following her down the hallways. Some lawyers watched her with curiosity, others with suspicion, and a few with something that looked like respect. Mr. Roberts, the head janitor who had hired her, noticed the change immediately. During their mid-morning break, as they shared coffee in the small cleaning closet in the building's basement, he spoke to her with the wisdom of his 62 years. "Kid, what you did up there was brave," he said, his weathered hands holding the chipped enamel mug he'd used for 20 years. "But it was also dangerous. Powerful men don't forget when someone makes them look bad." Emily nodded, aware of the truth in his words. She had grown up in a world where challenging the powerful had consequences. Her grandmother Eleanor had told her stories of when she worked as a seamstress for wealthy families in Brooklyn and how she had learned to be invisible to survive. "I had no choice, Mr. Roberts," Emily replied, her green eyes reflecting a determination he had come to recognize. "I couldn't stay silent watching an injustice. Just like my daughter Maria," the old man murmured with a sad smile. She had that same spark in her eyes, that need to do the right thing, even if it cost her dearly. Maria had been a lawyer, fighting for the rights of construction workers, until an accident at a poorly supervised site cost her her life. Mr. Roberts had never been able to prove that the construction company's negligence caused the accident, but he suspected there was more to it than the official reports revealed. That afternoon, as Emily was organizing the day's discarded documents, she found something that made her heart stop. Among the papers destined for the shredder was a partial file from an old case. The name on the cover made her tremble. "Eminent Domain Seizure, Queens, 1998. With trembling hands, she opened the file. The pages were yellowed and some were stained, but she could clearly read the details. It was her grandmother's case, the land where she had spent her childhood, where Eleanor Hayes had grown lavender and raised Emily after her parents died in a car accident when she was only 8. According to the documents, the land had been seized for public use, but nothing had ever been built on it. Emily vividly remembered the day her grandmother received the notice. Eleanor had cried silently that night, thinking the child was asleep, but Emily had heard every muffled sob. "I don't understand, Grandma," Emily had asked the next morning. "Why do we have to leave if this is our home?" "Because that's how things are, sweetheart," Eleanor had replied, hugging her tightly. "The powerful take what they want, and we can only move on with dignity." They had to move to a small house in a working-class neighborhood in the Bronx, far from the fields of flowers, far from the happy memories. Eleanor had tried to adapt, but her heart had remained in that land she had worked with her own hands for 30 years. Now, reading the file, Emily discovered something that changed her entire understanding of that family tragedy. The signatures on the seizure documents didn't match. There were discrepancies in the dates, irregularities in the official seals, and most disturbingly of all, the name of the law firm that had facilitated the legal transaction was Thompson & Reed LLP. Emily felt the air leave her lungs. The very place where she now worked had been complicit in the injustice that had destroyed her grandmother's life. And something else troubled her. One of the signatures on the documents looked familiar, though she couldn't place where she had seen it before. That night, in her small one-room apartment in the Bronx, Emily spread the documents out on her tiny kitchen table. The light from the table lamp cast shadows on the yellowed pages as she compared dates, signatures, and official seals. Her photographic memory worked frantically, searching for connections, analyzing every detail. Her grandmother had passed away 3 years ago, taking with her stories she never finished telling, but Emily remembered fragments of conversations, whispered comments when Eleanor thought she wasn't listening. She had mentioned a man's name, someone who had promised to help her and then disappeared when she needed him most. "Williams," Emily murmured in the solitude of her apartment. She said a Mr. Williams had given her hope. The last name echoed in her mind like a painful memory. Could it be the same Williams? Had Ethan's father been involved in the fraudulent seizure of her grandmother's land? The next day, Emily arrived at work with renewed determination, but also with an emotional burden that threatened to overwhelm her. As she cleaned the offices, she paid special attention to any document that mentioned old cases or the name Williams. That's when Ethan found her. It was 6 in the evening, and most of the employees had already left. Emily was in the law library on the 12th floor, organizing the books the lawyers had consulted during the day. She had developed a habit of reading a few pages while she worked, feeding her insatiable thirst for legal knowledge. "I didn't expect to find you here so late," Ethan said from the library entrance. Emily jumped, dropping the book she was holding. "I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. I didn't know you were still in the building. I'll finish up right away." "Don't worry," he replied, approaching slowly. "Actually, I was hoping for a chance to talk to you." Emily felt her heart race, but she wasn't sure if it was from nervousness or the mix of contradictory emotions she felt towards this man who represented everything she had learned to distrust, yet who intrigued her in a way she couldn't explain. "How can I help you?" she asked, maintaining a professional distance. Ethan walked over to one of the windows overlooking the city skyline. The city lights were beginning to turn on, creating a mosaic of colors that reflected in his blue eyes. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally, "and also to apologize." "Apologize? For my comment the other day. It was arrogant and disrespectful." He turned to look at her directly. "I had no right to assume that no one in that room could question my decision." Emily studied his expression, searching for signs of falsehood or manipulation, but what she saw in his eyes surprised her. There was genuine humility there, and something else she couldn't identify. "It wasn't personal," she replied cautiously. "I just saw a mistake and couldn't stay quiet." "That's exactly what impresses me," Ethan said, sitting in one of the library chairs. "Can I ask you something?" Emily nodded, though every instinct told her to keep her distance. "Why do you study law if you work here as cleaning staff? With your knowledge, you could be at any university, get an official degree." The question touched a deep wound. Emily looked down at her hands, which were still holding the cleaning cloth. "Universities cost money," she answered simply, "and I have to work to live. You don't have family who can help you." "My grandmother raised me alone. She died 3 years ago." Emily felt the familiar lump in her throat as she spoke of Eleanor. "We never had much, but she taught me that education was the only wealth no one could take from me." Ethan listened in silence, and something in his expression changed. The corporate hardness softened, replaced by something more human. "Would you be interested in having us talk to Mr. Thompson about the possibility of you reviewing some contracts? As a freelance consultant, of course, it would be paid." Emily looked at him with surprise and suspicion. "Why would you do that?" "Because we waste talent every day," Ethan replied sincerely, "and because I made a mistake by underestimating you. I'd like to make up for it." Emily felt an internal conflict. Part of her wanted to accept, wanted the opportunity to use her knowledge formally, but another part, the one holding the documents about her grandmother's land, the one that suspected this man could be connected to her family's tragedy, told her to stay away. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Ethan nodded, respecting her caution. He stood up to leave, but paused at the door. "Emily," he said, and it was the first time he'd said her full name. It sounded different in his voice, warmer, more personal. "Whatever your decision, I want you to know that I respect you deeply. What you did the other day, it changed my perspective on a lot of things." After he left, Emily remained alone in the library, surrounded by books and unanswered questions. Her reflection in the window showed a woman torn between the desire for justice and the need to survive, between an attraction to a man who seemed genuine and the suspicion that he represented everything that had hurt her family. That night, as she walked to the subway station, Emily felt she was at a crossroads. The hidden documents in her bag felt heavier than ever, and Ethan's offer echoed in her mind as both an opportunity and a trap. She didn't know yet that her decision would change not only her life, but his as well, in ways neither of them could have imagined. Part 3. A week after their conversation in the library, Emily made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. She had spent entire nights analyzing the documents about her grandmother's land, comparing them with similar cases she had found in the firm's discarded files. Each discovery brought her closer to a painful truth she wasn't sure she wanted to face. On Friday morning, as the November sun created patterns of light and shadow in the building's hallways, Emily went to Ethan's office on the 32nd floor. She had decided to accept his proposal, but not for the reasons he believed. The receptionist, an elegant middle-aged woman named Carmen, looked at her with surprise when Emily asked to speak with Mr. Williams. "Do you have an appointment?" Carmen asked, eyeing Emily's cleaning uniform with barely concealed disapproval. "He asked me to come," Emily replied calmly, used to such looks. After an internal call, Carmen let her in. Ethan's office was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of New York City, from the historic streets of downtown to the modern skyscrapers of Hudson Yards. The Brazilian mahogany desk was perfectly organized, and the walls were decorated with diplomas from prestigious universities and photographs of architectural projects. Ethan stood up when she entered, and Emily noticed he seemed different, less formal, more approachable. He was wearing a white shirt without a tie, sleeves rolled up, as if he had been working intensely. "Emily, I'm glad you came," he said, gesturing to a chair in front of his desk. "Have you considered my proposal?" "Yes," she replied, sitting up straight. "I accept, but I have conditions." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "I'm listening. I want full access to the firm's historical archives, all cases from the last 20 years. Emily kept her voice steady, though her heart was beating fast. "And I want you to let me investigate cases of eminent domain." "Eminent domain?" Ethan leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "Is there a specific reason for that request?" Emily had prepared this answer. "Eminent domain cases are complex and often have irregularities that go unnoticed. If I'm going to be useful reviewing contracts, I need to understand all the legal aspects that could affect them." It was a half-truth, but Ethan seemed satisfied with the explanation. He nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable. Carmen can arrange for you to have access to the archives." He stood up and walked to the window. "There's something else I'd like to discuss with you." "What is it?" "My father died last year," he said, his voice taking on a more somber tone. "Since then, I've been reviewing all the family businesses. I've found irregularities, transactions I don't fully understand, documents that seem inconsistent." Emily felt her skin crawl. "What kind of irregularities?" "Land acquisitions mostly. Properties that were bought at prices far below market value, or that were acquired under circumstances that aren't clear in the records." Ethan turned to look at her. "I was wondering if, with your ability to spot legal inconsistencies, you could help me understand what really happened." Emily felt as if fate were playing a cruel joke on her. The man whose family had destroyed her grandmother's life was asking her to help him uncover those very injustices. It was as if the universe had conspired to put her in this impossible position. "I can try," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Excellent. Carmen will set up a temporary office for you on the 25th floor, and of course, you'll receive adequate compensation for this additional work." Emily nodded and stood up to leave, but Ethan stopped her. "Emily, there's one more thing." His voice had a different quality, more personal. "I'd like to invite you to lunch tomorrow, outside the office, to discuss the details of the work, of course, but also, I'd like to get to know you better." Emily looked directly into the blue eyes that had begun to haunt her in dreams she didn't want to admit. She saw something there that unsettled her, a genuine interest that went beyond the professional. And most disturbingly, she felt a reciprocal attraction that fought against everything her rational mind told her. "I'm not sure that's appropriate," she replied. "Not as boss and employee," Ethan clarified quickly. "As two people who respect each other and who might become friends." Emily knew she should say no. She knew that getting personally involved with him would complicate everything in dangerous ways. But something in his expression, a vulnerability he rarely showed, made her hesitate. "Just lunch," she said finally, "and we'll talk about work." "Just lunch," he agreed, but his smile suggested he hoped for much more from that meal. That afternoon, Emily settled into the small office Carmen had prepared for her. It was a modest but functional space, with a view of the building's interior and a table large enough to spread out documents. Most importantly, she had access to the firm's database and a security key that allowed her to access the historical archives. With trembling hands, Emily entered her first search, Eminent Domain Queens, 1998. The results appeared immediately, and her heart stopped when she saw the screen. There were dozens of documents related to her grandmother's case, internal memos, correspondence with government officials, and most devastatingly, an email from the firm recommending expediting the seizure process before the owner could hire proper legal representation. Emily read each document with growing horror. Not only had there been fraud in the seizure of her grandmother's land, but it had been a calculated and systematic fraud. The firm had actively collaborated with corrupt officials to seize several plots in Queens, all intended for a real estate development that never materialized. And then she found the document that changed everything. It was a letter, dated 2 weeks before her grandmother's death, addressed to Mr. Emilio Williams. In it, Eleanor Hayes pleaded for a meeting, explaining that she had discovered irregularities in the seizure of her land and that she only wanted justice, not revenge. The letter ended with a sentence that made Emily cry. "Mr. Williams, you have the power to do the right thing. My granddaughter studies law at night. She dreams of being a lawyer to help people like us. Don't let her lose faith in justice." At the bottom of the document was a handwritten note from Emilio Williams. "File without response. Case closed." Emily collapsed into her chair, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Her grandmother had known the truth, had fought until the end, and had died without getting an answer. And now she was working for the son of the man who had ignored Eleanor's final plea. The sound of the door startled her. She quickly wiped her tears, but it wasn't enough. Ethan was standing in the doorway, a look of genuine concern on his face. "Emily, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she lied, trying to close the documents on the screen. But Ethan had seen enough. He approached and read the name on the screen, Eleanor Hayes, Eminent Domain Queens. "Did you know Eleanor Hayes?" he asked softly. Emily knew the moment of truth had arrived. She could no longer maintain the deception, no longer pretend her interest in these cases was purely professional. "She was my grandmother," she said, her voice barely audible. Ethan stood motionless, processing the information. Slowly, he sat in the chair across from her. "Your grandmother was Eleanor Hayes," he repeated, as if he needed to say it out loud to believe it. "Yes." Emily looked up to meet his eyes. "And your father destroyed her life." The silence that followed was heavy with pain, revelation, and a terrible understanding of the forces that had brought them to this moment. Ethan looked at the documents on the screen, then at Emily, and finally understood the magnitude of what he had just discovered. "That's why you accepted my proposal," he said, his voice full of painful understanding. "It wasn't for the job. It was for this." Emily nodded, unable to speak. "And that's why you study law. That's why you know so much about eminent domain and contracts." Ethan ran his hands through his hair, clearly overwhelmed. "My God, Emily, I'm so sorry. It wasn't you," she said, surprising herself with the gentleness in her voice. "But now you understand why there can't be anything between us. Your family and mine. There's too much pain, too much history." Ethan looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "No," he said firmly, "I don't accept that." "What?" "My father's mistakes don't have to define our future." He leaned forward, his blue eyes burning with determination. "I can fix this, Emily. I can do what my father didn't. It's too late. My grandmother is dead, but you're alive, and you deserve justice." Ethan took her hands, which were trembling slightly. "I'm cancelling lunch tomorrow. Instead, I want you to come with me to Queens. I want to see the land. I want to fully understand what my family did to yours." Emily looked at him through her tears, seeing in him a complexity she hadn't expected. This man, who represented everything she had learned to hate, was now offering her something she thought she would never have, the possibility of real justice. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care?" Ethan released her hands and stood up, walking to the window. "Because since I met you, everything I thought I knew about myself and my family has changed," he said without turning around. "And because," he paused, as if debating whether to say the next words, "because I've fallen in love with you, Emily, and I can't love someone my family has hurt without trying to repair it." Emily felt as if the world had stopped. Ethan's words echoed in the small office, filled with an honesty that moved and terrified her at the same time. "Have you ever had to choose between love and justice? Do you think Emily should give Ethan a chance or protect her heart? Tell us in the comments what you would do in her place and what city you're writing from. Like if this story is touching your soul, and subscribe, because in the next parts we'll find out if love can heal the wounds of the past or if some pains are too deep to forgive. Part 4. Saturday dawned with a clear sky over Queens, that unique borough of New York City where diverse neighborhoods tell stories of generations. Emily had spent a sleepless night, internally debating if she had made the right decision in agreeing to accompany Ethan to the land where she had once been happy with her grandmother, Eleanor. At 9 in the morning, she found him waiting at the entrance of the Jamaica station, dressed in dark jeans and a blue shirt that made his eyes seem more intense in the sunlight. He held a bouquet of lavender, the same flowers her grandmother used to grow, and when he handed them to her, Emily felt something both break and mend in her heart. "I thought you might like to bring these," Ethan said softly, noticing how she reverently touched the purple petals. The car ride was quiet at first. They drove through streets bustling with life, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost rural memory Emily held of her childhood corner of the borough. For a moment, she could imagine what this place was like when her grandmother was young. "My grandmother used to tell me that on weekends, whole families would come out to the local parks," Emily said, finally breaking the silence. "She and my grandfather, Sam, met here at a community dance. He was a musician and sang to her, even though it wasn't her birthday." Ethan smiled, picturing the scene. "How old were they?" "She was 17. He was 20. They got married 6 months later." Emily touched the silk ribbon in her hair, now more worn but still precious. This ribbon was his wedding gift to her, the only expensive thing he could ever afford. And you've worn it ever since she died. It's my way of keeping her with me. Emily looked out at the passing storefronts and houses. When we lost the land, she never came back here. She said it hurt too much to see what we'd lost. Ethan remained silent, processing the weight of that confession. He had grown up in a world where losses were financial, temporary, always recoverable. He hadn't experienced the kind of loss that uproots an entire life, that erases family histories and generational dreams. After a short drive, they arrived at the street closest to the property. Emily had memorized the address from childhood, but as they began to walk down the blocks she once knew like the back of her hand, she realized how much everything had changed. Where there were once modest houses with gardens full of flowers, high concrete walls now stood. Urban development had hit this part of Queens with the force of a tsunami, erasing traces of the quieter life that had once defined the area. "It's this way," Emily said, pointing down a street that looked familiar yet different. They walked in silence for another 10 minutes until Emily stopped abruptly in front of a vacant lot, surrounded by a rusty chain-link fence. Her eyes filled with tears as she recognized the shape of the land, the gentle slope where the house had been, the giant oak tree that still stood in one corner. "This was it," she whispered, her fingers gripping the fence. "The house was there, where that pile of rubble is, and the lavender garden stretched over there where there's only weeds now." Ethan looked at the abandoned lot, trying to imagine the life that had flourished there. He could picture a little girl with green eyes running among the flowers, learning the secrets of the earth and the importance of dignity from her grandmother. "What happened exactly?" he asked softly. Emily wiped her tears and began to tell the full story. She spoke of the eminent domain notice that arrived one day in March 1998, of how her grandmother had tried to hire a lawyer but didn't have enough money, of the empty promises from corrupt officials who assured the family they would receive fair compensation. "They gave us 3 months to leave," Emily continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "My grandmother sold everything she could, even her wedding jewelry, to pay the deposit on a new apartment. But the compensation they promised never came. And the land? As you can see, nothing for public use was ever built. According to my research, it was resold 3 years later to a real estate development company for 10 times the price they paid for it." Emily looked at him directly. "A subsidiary of the Williams Group." Ethan felt as if he had been physically struck. His father had not only participated in the fraudulent seizure, but had profited directly from it. "Emily, I didn't know." "I know," she interrupted, "and that's the tragedy. You're a good man, Ethan. I've seen it these past weeks in the way you treat your employees, in how you reacted when you found out the truth. But you're the son of a man who destroyed my family." They stood there for an hour, Emily recounting memories of her childhood in that place, and Ethan listening to every word with deep attention. She told him about the afternoons helping her grandmother water the flowers, the mornings collecting eggs from the chickens, the nights sitting under the oak tree, while Eleanor told her stories from the Great Depression. "My grandmother had a saying," Emily said, as she placed the lavender Ethan had brought by the tree. "The most beautiful flowers grow in the toughest soil." I always thought she was talking about plants, but now I understand she was talking about people. Ethan watched her kneel by the oak tree, her delicate hands arranging the flowers with the same care he imagined she had learned from her grandmother. In that moment, something fundamentally changed in him. It wasn't just attraction he felt, or even romantic love. It was something deeper, an understanding that this woman represented everything he had lost in his pursuit of material success. "Emily," he said, kneeling beside her, "I want to buy this land. I want to give it back to you." She looked at him with surprise and something that looked like panic. "No," she said firmly, "I don't want your charity. It's not charity, it's justice. It's the same thing." Emily stood up, moving away from him. "Don't you get it? If I accept that, everything I fought for becomes meaningless. I'll be the poor girl rescued by the generous millionaire. I won't be the woman who made herself." Ethan then understood the complexity of her pride, the delicate balance between her need for justice and her determination to keep her dignity intact. It was the same pride he had seen in her from day one, the same strength that had driven her to study law in secret and confront a room full of lawyers. "Then what do you propose?" he asked. Emily was silent for a long moment, looking out at the land that had been her home. When she finally spoke, her voice had an iron determination. "I want to win this land back. I want to use the law to reclaim it, to prove the fraud, to get real justice." She turned to him. "And I want you to help me, not as a benefactor, but as a partner. Lend me your influence, your contacts. your knowledge of the system, and I'll bring my intelligence and my determination. And after? After, we'll see if there's an after for us. It was a bold, risky proposal that could cost Ethan much more than money. Exposing himself publicly would mean admitting his father's crimes, facing government investigations, possibly losing lucrative contracts. She was asking him to choose between his business empire and her. Ethan didn't hesitate for a second. "I accept," he said, extending his hand. "Partners." Emily took his hand, and as their skin touched, they both felt an electric current that had nothing to do with business. It was the moment two completely different worlds decided to unite, to create something new, something neither of them had imagined possible. "There's something else you need to know," Emily said, not letting go of his hand. "Mr. Thompson was directly involved in the seizure. I saw his signature on several documents. He knows I'm Eleanor Hayes's granddaughter. Do you think it's dangerous?" "I think a man who has kept secrets for 20 years will do anything to protect them." Ethan nodded gravely. He had known Charles Thompson since childhood. He had been his father's partner and had handled the family's most sensitive legal affairs. If Emily was right, they were about to face an adversary who knew all their secrets and had a lot to lose. As they walked back to the car, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Real hope. Not the vague hope that things would get better someday, but the concrete certainty that she had the power to change her story. Ethan, for his part, felt for the first time that his life had a purpose beyond profit. He had found a cause worth fighting for, and more importantly, he had found someone for whom it was worth becoming a better version of himself. Neither of them knew that their conversations had been overheard. Back at the law firm, Mr. Thompson had been monitoring Emily's activities since she began reviewing the historical archives. He had seen the documents she consulted, noticed her specific interest in eminent domain cases, and had begun to suspect that her presence at the firm was no coincidence. That night, as Emily and Ethan had dinner at a small restaurant in Greenwich Village, sharing stories of their very different childhoods but united by a common purpose, Mr. Thompson was making phone calls to contacts he hadn't used in years. He was preparing an offensive aimed at destroying Emily before she could destroy him. The war had begun, though the two new allies didn't know it yet. Part 5. The next 3 months transformed both Emily and Ethan in ways neither had anticipated. Working together in the evenings, after Emily finished her cleaning duties, they had built a solid legal case against the fraudulent seizure of the Queen's property. But more than that, they had built a relationship that defied all the social barriers that supposedly separated them. Emily had flourished intellectually with access to real legal resources. Ethan had gotten her a membership in the Bar Association, access to professional legal databases, and had discreetly hired a private investigator to gather additional evidence. She, in turn, had proven to have a legal mind more brilliant than many licensed attorneys, capable of finding obscure precedents and building arguments that impressed even the most experienced jurists. But their professional partnership had evolved into something much more personal and intimate. One rainy February afternoon, while they were reviewing documents in the makeshift office Ethan had set up for Emily in his own corporate building, he suddenly stopped in the middle of an explanation about property laws and looked at her with an intensity that made her blush. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, unconsciously touching the silk ribbon in her hair. "Nothing," Ethan replied, but his smile said otherwise. "It's just, do you realize how extraordinary you are?" Emily looked down at the papers scattered on the table. They had developed a comfortable work routine, but moments like this, when he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, made her feel vulnerable in a way that scared her. "I'm not extraordinary," she murmured. "I'm just persistent. You're much more than that." Ethan moved closer, his hand gently brushing hers on the documents. "You're brave, smart, compassionate. You're perfect." "I'm not," Emily insisted, but she didn't pull her hand away. "I'm scared all the time. Scared I'm not enough. Scared this is a mistake. Scared that—" "Scared of what?" Emily looked up to meet his blue eyes, and in them she saw something that both calmed and terrified her. Unconditional love. "Scared of falling in love with you," she whispered. Ethan smiled with a tenderness that made her heart race. "It's too late for that," he said softly, bringing her hand to his lips and gently kissing her knuckles. "We're both already lost." That night, after dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, they walked through the streets filled with art galleries and bohemian cafes. The nocturnal city surrounded them with its vibrant energy, but they were lost in their own growing bubble of intimacy. "My grandmother would have hated this," Emily said suddenly, stopping in front of an illuminated fountain. "Hated what?" "That I'm falling in love with the son of the man who hurt her." Emily sat on the edge of the fountain, her expression conflicted. She always told me that some wounds are too deep to heal, that some offenses can't be forgiven. Ethan sat beside her, respecting her space, but staying close enough to offer comfort. "What do you think she'd say if she could see you now?" he asked. "If she saw you fighting for justice, using your intelligence to change things?" Emily considered the question carefully. "I think she'd be proud," she finally admitted, "but also worried. She knew what it cost to fight the powerful. But you're not fighting alone this time." Emily looked at him, seeing in his expression a sincerity that dispelled many of her doubts. "No," she acknowledged. "This time I have an ally." Ethan took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You have more than an ally, Emily. You have someone who loves you beyond reason, who is willing to risk everything he has for you." Emily felt tears in her eyes, but this time they were not of pain, but of a joy she had thought impossible. "I love you too," she said, the words coming more easily than she had expected. "And that terrifies me." They kissed there by the fountain, under the lights of the city that had witnessed so many loves and losses. It was a kiss that sealed not only their love, but their mutual commitment to face whatever the future held, together. But their newfound happiness was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. The following Monday, Emily arrived at the firm to find her office had been closed and her personal belongings packed in a box. Carmen, the receptionist, looked at her with a mixture of pity and discomfort. "Mr. Thompson wants to see you in his office immediately," she said in a low voice, "and he's called a meeting of all the senior partners." Emily felt a cold premonition in her stomach. For months, she had been waiting for Thompson to make his move, and apparently, that moment had arrived. Mr. Thompson's office occupied an entire corner of the 30th floor, with windows offering panoramic views of the city. The decor was ostentatious. Framed diplomas covered one entire wall, a collection of pre-Columbian artifacts filled illuminated display cases, and behind his ebony desk hung an oil portrait of himself in judicial robes. When Emily entered, she found not only Thompson but 5 senior partners of the firm, all men over 50 with stern expressions. It was clearly a planned ambush. "Miss Hayes," Thompson began in a formal, cold voice, "we have discovered some serious irregularities in your employment here." Emily maintained her composure, though her heart was beating rapidly. "What kind of irregularities?" Thompson opened a thick folder on his desk. "For starters, you lied on your employment application. You claimed to have prior experience which you did not. You forged work references. And most seriously, you have been stealing confidential documents from the firm." Emily felt as if the floor was moving beneath her feet. "That's not true. I've never stolen anything." "No." Thompson pulled several photographs from the folder. "These images were taken by our security cameras. They show you photographing documents with your cell phone, taking papers from the building, accessing files for which you had no authorization." Emily looked at the photographs with growing horror. They were all real, but taken completely out of context. The photos of documents were taken to facilitate her research with Ethan's knowledge. The papers she had taken were copies he had specifically given her, and the file access had been officially authorized. "All of that was authorized," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Williams gave me permission to—" "Mr. Williams?" Thompson interrupted with a cruel smile. "How convenient. Unfortunately, Mr. Williams has no authority over the internal policies of this firm, and he isn't here to corroborate your story." Emily realized they had timed this confrontation perfectly. Ethan was in Chicago for a business meeting that had been scheduled just last week. "We can call him," Emily suggested, but Thompson shook his head. "I'm afraid it's too late for that. You see, we've also investigated your family background." Thompson's smile turned more sinister. "It's very interesting to discover that you are the granddaughter of one Eleanor Hayes, isn't it?" The silence in the room became palpable. Emily felt all eyes fix on her, assessing her with new understanding. "Your grandmother," Thompson continued, "was a troublesome woman who constantly filed baseless legal claims, and it seems the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Clearly, you infiltrated this firm with the intent to sabotage our work and seek revenge for imagined grievances of the past." "The grievances weren't imagined," Emily said, her voice growing in strength. "My grandmother was the victim of systematic fraud, and you know it because you participated in it." The partners exchanged alarmed glances. Thompson stood up, his face reddening with anger. "How dare you make such slanderous accusations? You are a thief, a liar, and now a slanderer. Not only will you be terminated immediately, but we will be pressing criminal charges against you." Emily felt panic rising in her chest, but then she remembered her grandmother's words. "The most beautiful flowers grow in the toughest soil," She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Thompson. "Press whatever charges you want," she said, with a calmness that surprised even herself. "But know that I have documented evidence of the irregularities in the 1998 seizure, including your direct participation in the fraud." "What evidence?" Thompson asked, but Emily detected a note of unease in his voice. "Internal memos with your signature authorizing the acceleration of the seizure process, correspondence with government officials, coordinating the subsequent sale of the land. And, most interestingly, bank records showing payments from the Williams Group to an offshore account registered in your wife's name." The color drained from Thompson's face. Emily had been saving that card for the perfect moment, and apparently it had arrived. "You don't have access to bank records," Thompson said, but his voice sounded less certain. "Never underestimate a woman who cleans offices," Emily replied, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We hear everything, see everything, and remember everything." The tension in the room was palpable. The partners looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation had taken. Some of them evidently had not known about Thompson's past activities. "This is ridiculous," Thompson declared, but Emily could see he was losing control of the situation. "I will not be intimidated by a cleaning woman making baseless accusations." "Baseless?" Emily opened her bag and took out a folder she had been saving for an occasion like this. "Would you like us to review these documents together, Mr. Thompson? I'm sure the partners would be very interested in all the details." It was at that moment that the office door burst open. Ethan strode in like a storm, his face a mask of controlled fury. Behind him were two men in dark suits, whom Emily didn't recognize. "What's going on here?" Ethan demanded, his voice cutting through the air like a razor. Thompson quickly composed himself, though Emily could see beads of sweat on his forehead. "Mr. Williams, what a surprise. I thought you were in Chicago. I cancelled the meeting when I heard what you were planning." Ethan stood beside Emily, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic of the room. "These are Agents Morales and Vasquez from the Attorney General's office. They have been investigating irregularities in land seizures since 1995. The two agents showed their badges and walked directly to Thompson. "Mr. Charles Thompson," said Agent Morales, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "This is a mistake," Thompson protested, but his voice had lost all its previous authority. "You can't arrest me based on the fantasies of a cleaning lady." Emily stepped toward him, her green eyes shining with a fierce intensity. "I'm not a cleaning lady," she said in a clear, strong voice. "I am Eleanor Hayes's granddaughter. I am a law student who knows her rights, and I am the woman who is going to make sure you finally pay for what you did." As the agents handcuffed Thompson, Emily felt a mixture of triumph and relief that threatened to overwhelm her. They had won this battle, but she knew the war was far from over. Ethan took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, in a gesture of support and solidarity. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly. "I am now," she replied, looking toward the window where the afternoon sun cast golden patterns on the marble floor. "I think my grandmother can finally rest in peace." But as they watched Thompson being led away, Emily knew her story with Ethan was just beginning. They had faced the past together, fought for justice side by side, and had proven that love could overcome the deepest social barriers. However, one question still remained. What would they build together now that they had cleared away the rubble of the past? Part 6. 6 months after Mr. Thompson's arrest, Emily stood on the same plot of land in Queens, where she had cried with Ethan months before. But this time, the landscape had changed dramatically. Where there had once been weeds and rubble, a structure of wood and glass now stood, gleaming under the August morning sun. The legal battle had been long and complicated. The case against Thompson had uncovered a web of corruption involving dozens of government officials and business people. Emily had testified before a grand jury, provided crucial evidence that led to multiple arrests, and watched as justice, slow but sure, finally caught up with those who had abused their power. Her grandmother's land had been officially returned to the Hayes family after a federal judge declared the original seizure null and void. But Emily had made a decision that surprised everyone, including Ethan. She had decided to turn the property into something that honored both her grandmother's memory and her own vision for the future. Eleanor Hayes Legal Aid Center was written in gold letters above the main entrance of the building. It was a free legal clinic where Emily and a team of young lawyers provided legal services to low-income families, specializing in property rights cases, labor disputes, and domestic violence. Emily had officially finished her law degree in an accelerated program that Ethan had discreetly funded, though she had insisted on paying him back with her first salary as a certified lawyer. She had passed the bar exam with the highest score in the institution's history, but more importantly, she had found her purpose in life, to use her intelligence and experience to help others who, like her grandmother, needed a voice in the legal system. On this particular morning, Emily was nervous for reasons that had nothing to do with work. Ethan had asked her to meet him at the center at 10 in the morning, saying he had something important to show her. Over the past few months, their relationship had deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. Ethan had transformed the Williams Group from within, implementing transparency policies, establishing a compensation fund for victims of the company's past practices, and reorienting the corporate focus toward sustainable development. He had faced resistance from some shareholders and lost lucrative contracts, but he had gained something much more valuable: self-respect and a relationship with Emily based on shared values rather than class differences. When Emily saw his car approaching on the gravel path they had built to access the center, her heart began to beat faster. Over the past few weeks, she had noticed subtle changes in his behavior, more intense gazes, deeper conversations about the future, and a tenderness that suggested something important was about to happen. Ethan got out of the car, holding something that made Emily stop in her tracks. It was her grandmother's silk ribbon, but transformed. The frayed edges had been carefully restored, the colors revived, and it was wrapped around a small blue velvet box. "What is this?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's something I should have done months ago," Ethan replied, approaching until he stood before her. "But I wanted to wait until we were here in the place where it all began for your family." Emily felt tears in her eyes as he carefully unwrapped the ribbon to reveal the box. When he opened it, her breath caught. Inside was a ring, but it wasn't the typical engagement ring she might have expected. It was a unique creation, a white gold band intertwined with real silk threads, with a central diamond surrounded by tiny, fossilized lavender buds. "I had this made especially for you," Ethan explained, his own voice trembling slightly with emotion. "The gold comes from a fair trade mine. The silk threads are the same kind your grandmother used in her ribbon, and the stones," he took her hands, "are fossilized lavender I found on this very land." Emily couldn't speak. It was the most beautiful and meaningful gift she had ever received, not just for its beauty, but for the amount of thought and love it represented. "Emily Hayes," Ethan continued, kneeling on the earth where her grandmother's flowers once grew, "you have taught me that true value comes not from money or power, but from integrity, compassion, and the courage to fight for what is right. You have shown me that true love is not possession, but partnership, not control, but respect." Tears streamed freely down Emily's cheeks as she looked at the man who had transformed her life in ways she had never dreamed possible. "I want to spend the rest of my life learning from you, fighting alongside you, building something beautiful together. Will you marry me? Not because I promised to in a boardroom, but because I can't imagine a future without you in it." Emily looked around at the land where her grandmother had been happy, where she had learned about dignity and resilience, and where she now helped other families fight for their rights. She could almost feel Eleanor's presence, blessing this union that would have seemed impossible years ago. "Yes," she said finally, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Williams. But not because you're rich or powerful, but because you are good, because you love me for who I am, and because together we can make a difference in the world." Ethan slipped the ring on her finger, and when he stood up to kiss her, Emily felt that all the broken pieces of her life had finally found their place. The kiss was interrupted by applause and shouts of joy. Emily turned to see Mr. Roberts, now the maintenance supervisor of the legal center, walking toward them along with Carmen, the former receptionist who now worked as the center's administrative coordinator, and several of the young lawyers who made up her team. "Did you think we wouldn't notice what you were planning?" Carmen shouted, running to hug Emily. "Mr. Roberts saw him practicing the speech in his office." Mr. Roberts, with tears in his 62-year-old eyes, came to hug Emily with the tenderness of a father. "My girl," he said with an emotional voice, "your grandmother would be so proud, not just of what you've achieved, but of the man you've chosen. You can see he loves you the right way." Emily hugged the old man who had been her first defender, the man who had seen her potential when she was just a desperate young woman looking for a job. The impromptu celebration lasted for hours. Someone had brought guitars, others had prepared food, and soon the land was filled with the sound of laughter, music, and shared stories. It was exactly the kind of celebration Eleanor Hayes would have appreciated: authentic, full of real affection, focused on genuine relationships rather than ostentation. As the sun began to set, Emily and Ethan found themselves alone by the oak tree that had witnessed so many important moments in their story. Emily wore the restored silk ribbon in her hair, and the ring shone on her finger like a promise of all the possibilities that lay ahead. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About my grandmother," Emily replied, leaning against the trunk of the century-old tree. "About how she used to say that the most beautiful flowers grow in the toughest soil. I think I finally understand what she meant." "What did she mean?" Emily smiled, gently touching the ring that symbolized not only their love, but also her triumph over the circumstances that had tried to define her life. "She meant that pain can be transformed into strength, that injustice can motivate change, and that true love can grow even in the most difficult situations." She looked toward the legal center they had built together. "She meant that we, the people who come from the tough soil, have the ability to create beauty where others only see problems." Ethan hugged her, marveling once again at the wisdom and emotional depth of this extraordinary woman who had completely changed his life. "And what kind of flowers are we going to grow together?" he asked softly. Emily laughed, a sound full of joy and anticipation. "Lavender," she said without hesitation. "Flowers that honor those who came before us, that celebrate those who are with us now, and that plant seeds for those who will come after." 6 months later, Emily Hayes and Ethan Williams were married in a simple but beautiful ceremony on the Queen's property, surrounded by fields of lavender they had planted together. Emily wore a simple white silk dress she had chosen herself, and in her hair shone her grandmother's restored ribbon, now a symbol not of loss, but of continuity and hope. Mr. Roberts walked Emily to the makeshift altar they had built under the oak tree, filling the role that would have belonged to her father. The vows they exchanged were written by them, promises of partnership in the fight for justice, of mutual support in the challenges they would face, and of a love that transcended differences of origin and was based on shared values. The Eleanor Hayes Legal Aid Center continued to grow, becoming a model for similar clinics across the country. Emily became a recognized figure in the fight for the rights of the most vulnerable, but she never forgot her roots or allowed success to change her fundamental essence. Ethan completely transformed the Williams Group, focusing it on affordable housing projects and sustainable community development. Although he lost money in the short term, he gained something much more valuable, a company he could be proud to lead, and a legacy that honored rather than tarnished his father's memory. 5 years after their first meeting in the conference room, Emily stood in the same place, but this time holding her 6-month-old daughter, Eleanor Nora Williams, named in honor of her great-grandmother. The little girl had her mother's green eyes and a fierce determination already evident in the way she gripped Emily's finger. Ethan approached, finishing a work call, and took the baby in his arms, with the ease of a father completely in love with his daughter. "How was your day in court?" he asked, gently kissing Emily's forehead. "We won the case for the Bronx widows," Emily replied with a satisfied smile. "They're going to get the pensions they were owed and compensation for all the years of delay." "And how does it feel to be the most feared lawyer by corrupt corporations in all of New York?" Emily laughed, the same crystal-clear sound that had made Ethan fall in love with her from the beginning. "It feels like justice," she replied. "And it feels like I'm finally doing what I came into this world to do." As they walked on the land where the most beautiful flowers Emily had ever seen now grew, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had taken her from being an invisible young woman cleaning offices to becoming a powerful voice for the voiceless. Her story had become a legend in New York's legal circles, the cleaner who dismantled a multi-million-dollar contract and ended up marrying the millionaire. But more importantly, the woman who proved that intelligence, dignity, and determination can overcome any social barrier. But for Emily, the real triumph wasn't in the newspaper headlines or the won cases. It was in the small daily victories, every family that received justice, every young person who found hope in her story. Every day she woke up next to the man who loved her, exactly as she was. At dusk, as little Nora slept in her arms, and Ethan worked on his laptop preparing proposals for new community housing projects, Emily went out into the garden where the lavender grew. She gently touched the silk ribbon in her hair, now a symbol of all the strong women who had come before her and all those who would come after. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered into the night wind, "for teaching me that the most beautiful flowers grow in the toughest soil, for showing me that dignity is the one thing no one can take from us, and for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." Somewhere in the universe, Eleanor Hayes was smiling, knowing her granddaughter had found not only love but also her purpose, and that her family's story would continue to flourish for generations. The full moon illuminated the lavender fields, and in that golden light, Emily saw the future she and Ethan would build together. A future where love conquered prejudice, where justice triumphed over corruption, and where the most beautiful flowers would continue to grow in the land that had once been tough, but was now full of hope. This story of Emily and Ethan reminds us that true love knows no social barriers when it is founded on mutual respect, justice, and shared values. It teaches us that every person has an intrinsic worth that does not depend on their job or their origin, but on their character and their heart. What did you think of this story of love and overcoming adversity? Did you identify with Emily in her fight for dignity and justice? Tell us in the comments what city you're writing from and which part of the story moved you the most. Don't forget to like if this story touched your heart, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of true love and the determination of strong women. Your suggestions for new stories are always welcome, because in the end, we all deserve a love that sees us for who we really are, not for what we have or where we come from. And we all have the ability to blossom, no matter how tough the soil where we start.